pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In 1775, Britain had, depending how you count them, around 23 colonies in America. And only half of them rebelled against the British rule. What happened there had a direct impact on the American Revolution. And in those parts of the American continent, and also in the strategic and material support to the American Revolution, Spain played an important part that is normally not well known. The Revolutionary War was a revolutionary war, but it was a global war. The Revolutionary War was just a part of a theater of operations of the war that took place at the time. Those three dots mark the three theaters of operations that were involved in the war: the American theater, the European one, and the Asian theater. In the American one, actually there were several sub-theaters. The one you are most familiarized with is what happened in the 13 American colonies. But it was not the only one. Main important battles were fought in the South, where the colonies remained loyal to the British, and thus the role of Bernardo de Galvez. He won the Battle of Pensacola, Mobile, Manchac, and Baton Rouge. But also in the Caribbean. Spain's main objective in the Caribbean was to seize Jamaica from the British. Actually, Jamaica was the British most cherished possession in the whole Americas. The threat of losing Jamaica was really the key for the ending of the war. When the Britons realized that they were about to lose Jamaica, they sued for peace to France and to Spain. Because of the fear of losing Jamaica, they were forced to make peace and to surrender the 13 original colonies. But also there was a fourth sub-theater of operations in America. It was the Central America. The Britons made several attempts against several parts in Guatemala that were repelled by the governor of Guatemala at the time, who by chance, and not by chance, was Bernardo de Galvez's father. The second one was the European theater of operations. The first one was Minorca. Minorca is an island that was taken from the Spaniards by the Brits in the beginning of the 18th century. And Spain always wanted to have it back. And during this war, one of the main operations was the conquest of the island of Minorca. So the Brits had to keep in Minorca a huge garrison in order to defend itself. Second, Gibraltar. Gibraltar was the biggest battle in the American Revolutionary War. It involved the most people and the most ships than any other battle in the Revolutionary War. Finally, the Spaniards weren't unable to seize Gibraltar, and it continues so. And also another episode that is not well known, the Spanish and the French were organizing an invasion of the British Islands. That meant that the British Navy had to patrol all the seas and all the waters surrounding the British Isles in order to prevent the French and the Spaniards for invading their homeland. In India, the French and the Dutch possessions in India were attacked, or they attacked British possessions. So that meant that the British had to be involved and also taking care of that particular area. Now, Bernardo de Galvez and how he fits in all this global war. Bernardo de Galvez was born in a very poor family. Actually, there were shepherds in a small town and very poor town in the southern Spain called Macharabiaya. It's even difficult to pronounce it even for a Spaniard, okay? So they were actually 4 brothers. His father, Bernardo's father, Matias, and 3 other brothers. The brightest one and the oldest one was Jose. Jose de Galvez actually was just a shepherd, and he went to the local school. When the local bishop paid a visit to the local school, he discovered the brilliant boy that Jose was. And he decided to give him a scholarship to become a priest to the seminary in Malaga. He wasn't interested in being a priest, but he was interested in leaving Macharabiaya. So he accepted the scholarship, he studied for several years, and then he convinced the priest that he would serve better the church becoming a lawyer. And he went to the University of Alcalá, he graduated with honors, he started an important career in a legal office, and he became known as the best lawyer in town. He got involved in politics, which is normal for lawyers, and he was offered a posting. The most important posting at the time was the Minister of the Indies, that means the Minister for the Colonies, you will call it. And under his command was not only the colonies, but also the Navy to protect the colonies. So the power in his hands was huge. He would be Minister for the Indies for more than 15 years. And during his 15 years, he helped a little his family. He made one of his brothers governor of Guatemala, and then Viceroy of Mexico. Other of his brothers, he made him ambassador to Berlin and to Catherine the Great. And the other of his brothers, he was so bad that he could only appointed him as the guy dealing with taxes in the port of Cadiz. And he did a very good job there for himself because he amassed a huge amount of money in not very strict ways. But he was not that way, Jose de Galvez. And he had no kids. And so his heir was his nephew, Bernardo. Bernardo got his opportunity. He entered not the career of arms, not in the Spanish army, but in the French one. Why? Because in order to become a Spanish an officer in a Spanish regiment, you need to have contacts. You need to be noble, or at least of a family that is well known. The Galvez at the time were nobodies. Jose de Galvez was just the lawyer of the French embassy in Madrid. So what he did is he used his French contacts and he got an appointment for his nephew in the French army. And the French army at the time was allied with the Spanish army. They were allies in a short war against Portugal, in which an invasion took place. But actually, the regiment in which Bernardo was a lieutenant actually saw no action. So, but actually, the only thing he learned there is French, which would be very important for his future career. After his short period of being a lieutenant in the French army, he got through connections of his uncle, he got that his rank would be recognized in the Spanish army. So he entered the Spanish army as a lieutenant. He spent several years doing almost nothing. There's no record about those 2 years. And then his uncle was appointed Visitor General for New Spain. That's an appointment of a general inspector, something like that. For you to know, New Spain, today's Mexico, but not only Mexico, actually is from the middle of the U.S. till Panama, that chunk of land. The Changolong was the richest viceroyalty in Spain. The Spanish Empire and the British Empire, we will go to that afterwards, were completely different. When the Britons or the French make an empire, they make sure that the most important city of their empire is either London or Paris, which is normal. Your metropolis is the most important city. But that thing did not happen with the Spanish Empire. In the Spanish Empire, Madrid was not by far the largest city, nor the most rich one. The richest and the most populated city in the Spanish Empire was Mexico. Why? Because it was in the middle of the Atlantic commerce and the Pacific commerce. And the sheer size of Mexico City was double or triple the size of Madrid. It depends on the time you are taking into account. And it was the largest city in all the Spanish Empire. Larger than Seville, larger than Barcelona, larger than Valencia, larger than any city in the Iberian Peninsula. So, being appointed Visitor General for New Spain was a huge, important thing to be appointed. His powers were enormous, and when Jose was there for a couple of years, he was able to ask his nephew to come and appoint him as captain in one of the presidios. He went in 1769 to Mexico, and he was in charge of a company fighting the Apache at the time. The wars against the Apache were on and off during centuries, but actually there was not such thing as a war against the Apache, because the Apache were not a whole thing. What they were called the Apache were a succession of groups that actually had certain cultural traits in common, but they could be at war with each other, so they have no unity. So it was impossible to have a war against the Apache, because you can have a war against a tiny part of the Mescalero, while at the same time you were in peace with a tiny part of the Jicarilla, and that depends. There are 17 groups of the Apache at the same time. The thing was that the situation in the northern frontier of New Spain, which was at the time what is called today Texas, was very unstable. The settlers there were asking for a military campaign to be raised against the Native Americans. And Bernardo was the one who was in charge of commanding most of the troops that were there. But instead of succumbing to this warmongering environment, he decided to study the Apache. Of course, the aim to studying them was to defeat them. He was a military guy. But he studied not only their culture and their ways of war, but also the reasons for the war. And he concluded that the reasons for the war for the Apaches was the affronts that they had to receive from the Spaniards. He also concluded that they often are accused of being cruel, but he demanded from the Spaniards that what they would think about us, because we have been being as cruel as we pretend that they are. So he wrote a very balanced report, a report that was not published at the time and was lost for 200 years. And that was finally found in 1814 in a Mexican library. And since it was not going to be published and it was not going to be public, he can put there whatever he really thought was the truth. And the way he expresses himself, it's always wonderful. Then, after a series of campaigns against the Apache, in which he was wounded several times by arrows, lances, and stones thrown against him by the Apache, he returned to Spain, and he was appointed to the Avila Military Academy, which was the elite institution created by Alexander O'Reilly, who was a Spaniard, one of the wild geese that served in the Spanish army for 200 years. And this was the school that was going to prepare the future generals and lieutenant generals for the Spanish army. He was admitted there where he was only a captain, and he spent there a year and a half. But he was not actually an intellectual, so he was not happy going to class and everything. So when a war broke up with Algiers, he presented himself as volunteer. The war was because of international politics. It was just a way of showing the strength of the new Spanish Navy to the other European powers. And which better objective than a tiny spot in the South Mediterranean that could be bombarded and invaded and taken easily. Well, the thing was so ill-prepared and so ill-conceived and so ill-put into practice that it was a disaster. But Bernardo had a chance to distinguish himself during the attack by not retreating from the beach, despite several direct orders he received, until the last of his men was safely on board. So he was decorated after that, and he was promoted to lieutenant colonel. Lieutenant colonel at the time, you need to be 45, 50 years at the time. He was only 30-something. And that happened all the time. And, of course, envy started to play its role. But he was the nephew of the Minister of Indies. So in order to be directly against Bernardo was difficult. For example, at this time, he was the nephew, and only the nephew, despite of this distinguished service of the Minister of Indies, that when Alexander O'Reilly was thinking of a candidate in order to promote him to being the colonel of the fixed regiment of infantry in Louisiana, he thought about Bernardo, and he wrote a letter to his uncle, not to him, explaining the reasons why he has chosen his uncle, because he knew French. He had dealt with the Indians, Native Americans in Mexico, so that experience will be very valuable in order to deal with the Native Americans living in Louisiana, so on and so forth. But he wrote to José de Galvez, not to Bernardo. So, well, who cares? Bernardo was very happy, and on June the 1st, 1777, he landed in New Orleans and as colonel of the Louisiana Fixed Regiment and as acting governor of Louisiana. His instructions were two. First, to make Spain popular among the population. We must not forget that only 10 years before, there had been a huge rebellion of the French original population of Louisiana against the new Spanish rulers. Louisiana was French till 1763, and afterward it was switched to Spain, and it was not easy transition. There was a rebellion, and Alexander O'Reilly, again the same Alexander O'Reilly, was the one who crushed the rebellion, but actually executing 5-6 people. That's not a huge cost at the time, and then everything was pacified. But it was pacified by the boot, by the heavy hand. So Bernardo had the instructions to pacify and to make popular the Spanish rule among the local population. The other part of his instructions was to make sure that Louisiana was ready when the war was going to break against Britain. We are talking about January 1777. And, of course, the Brits and the 13 colonies have been in war since a couple of years ago. So the Spaniards knew that as long as this war continued, it was good news for Spain, because it was bad news for Britain. And in Spain, you have to take into account that the history of Spain can be divided in two different periods. Either we're killing Frenchmen or we are killing Englishmen. Okay? At this particular time of our history, we were concentrating in killing British, okay, with the help of the French. But that will change 25 years later, where we will be allies of the Brits killing the French in Napoleon. So it's either one or the other. So, but the importance of being a governor in Louisiana was beyond that. He was idolized by the local population. He was very fun, a fun guy to be with. He loved dancing. He loved playing music. He played the guitar. He was very popular, and he was loved by the people. And he found love there. He found the daughter. She was a widower, and she had a daughter of a wealthy Louisiana merchant called Gilberto de San Martin. She was Felicitas, and she was beautiful, and he completely lost his mind for her. Lost his mind because actually it was a bad match, because when his uncle married, he married 3 times, each time with a wife of a better social position. The third one was the daughter of the Count of La Puebla, The first one was nobody. So he was escalating social positions, and he was very concerned about that. And even though the Saint-Martin were the upper crust of Louisiana, come on, Louisiana was Louisiana, okay? So if he would have been in love, fell in love with the upper crust of Mexico City, well, maybe that would be different. But come on, Louisiana, no? So he had a huge problem with his family, huge one, so huge that in order to appease his political family, and especially the wife of his uncle, he baptized one of the new cities that he founded during his governorship in Louisiana as Valenzuela, whose was the name of his uncle's wife. Just to say, come on, I have put the name of her. We're going to be friends again. The second thing is that in order to marry anyone, a civil servant and an officer, in this case, need the permission of the king. It was in the regulations. And there was no way he was going to have the permission to marry Felipe de Saint-Martin. So he suddenly felt very ill, extremely ill. He was going to die. And there's a particular detail in canon law that allows that when the marriage takes place in the fear of death, the other formalities can be taken out, and you can marry quickly without all the proceedings and all the formalities. So he married that way Feliciana. I don't think he was so ill, because 8 months and 25 days after the marriage, Feliciana delivered a baby. So either he recovered very, very quickly, or he was not that ill. The process, in Spain, we invented bureaucracy, which is a good thing for a historian, because we have all the proceedings that what happened concerning his authorization to get married. And it was great to see how everything at the end was solved. Of course, but it was solved when he was governor of Louisiana, and he was a count, but not before. So he became very creolized, and he loved America.
Now, yeah, make all the demons quiet, yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah, I think that we've all had enough. What keeps you up at night, yeah, make all the demons quiet, yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah, I think that we've all had enough, yeah, I think that we've all had enough, sick of dealing with the old plan, they know that we're calling it wrong, you got me like, oh yeah, I think that we've all had enough. It's too late to try to go contain it. A generation fueled by creation. We live lives on a small screen nation. We control the airwaves, no negotiation. I refuse to think we need saving. Something good will come from creation. And when we think that the world is too anxious, we'll adapt, evolve, survive, and save it. What keeps you up at night, yeah, make all the demons quiet, yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah, I think that we've all had enough. What keeps you up at night, yeah, make all the demons quiet, yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah.